World Games 2025 has officially begun. We're about 1 week away from the powerlifting event starting, so it is prediction time. These are my 11 predictions for the lightweight and middleweight categories for the men and the women. So, first prediction straight away, FOMO is going to hit hard and people are going to regret not coming, right? Now, this is the elephant in the room when it comes to the World Games, and I want to get this out of the way first before I dive into the actual matchups we're going to see. And that is pretty much all the people who decided to not go to World Games. Now, I don't want to harp on about this too much or for too long, because World Games is actually still a pretty hype event, I think. Despite all of these people listed who have pulled out of World Games, which is pretty huge names, right? And a lot of them too. The people that are at World Games, still pretty amazing matchups we're going to see. So rather than focus on the negative of the guys who aren't there, guys and girls who aren't there, I'd rather focus more on the positive and the people who are. But, you know, have to address it. But my prediction is I think a lot of people who pulled out of World Games are going to regret it. I remember when World Games was announced it was going to go Raw for the first time back in, late 2023. It was a huge storyline. All of a sudden, the road to Nationals and Worlds 2024 was going to mean so much because of the implications that if you podium, you make it to World Games. It was a huge thing. And then all of a sudden, people started dropping off left and right for a whole bunch of reasons, which I'm not going to go into here. It's been well documented elsewhere. But I think they're going to watch the event and they're going to think, damn, I wish I was a part of that. That's my simple prediction there. All right, on to the lifters who are going to be at World Games. So for those that don't know, it's a bit of a unique setup. Instead of having 8 weight classes like we normally do at Worlds, there are 4 weight categories where each one of them contains 2 weight classes. So you have lightweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight. I'll do a part 2 video for predictions for light heavyweight and heavyweight, but for this I'll focus on lightweight and middleweight. Starting off with the women's lightweight weight category, which is the 47s and the 52s, we have Farhana Farid, and I'll have the GL points, so the best totals at what weight category or weight class they did it, as well as the GL points in the brackets there. So Farhana Farid, Annalisa Mota, Aurelie Nguyen, Plune Deckers, Noemi Alibert, Tiffany Chapone, Megan Lee Smith, and Evie Corrigan. So these are the lifters that make up the lightweight category across the women. And the significance of these GL points is that the meet is scored on GL points. So it's not total, right? It's not scored on kilos. It's not scored on percentage of the world record like Sheffield. It is formula based, the formula being GL points rather than dots, right? That's what the IPF uses. Now, this order also slightly differs to what you'll see on the nominations list, right? Because technically the nominations for most lifters came from 2024. I've included each lifter's best GL points based performance. That's why the order might be slightly different, but I think this gives a better idea of what we can expect, right? So yeah, going off of this, you can see that in the lightweight weight category for the women, there are it's a pretty clearly set podium, right? You have Tiff, and then you have the 2 New Zealand 52s in Megan Lee Smith and Evie, who are above the 120 GL points, and it's going to be a pretty big upset if any one of those 3 end up off of podium. And my specific predictions, I'll go through what order I think they're going to finish in. But my second prediction is going to be a pretty safe one. Farhana Farid is going to extend her deadlift world record. It currently stands at 209.5 that she hit at Worlds this year. And I think she first broke it in 2023, I want to say, and she's been extending it ever since. I think she got it at 203 first. I think it's a pretty safe bet that she's going to walk away with a further extension to a deadlift world record. So the rest of my predictions, I'm not sure about at all, but this one I'm pretty confident in. But number 3, Turbo Tiff is going to take bronze. She's going to finish in 3rd place, which pretty much follows what the nominations, what the best GL points based performances were from the nominated athletes here. But I think with it being grouped across weight classes, an interesting point is, in one way, the lighter weight classes have the advantage because they don't necessarily have to make weight at their usual weight class limit. For example, Tiff could come in anywhere between 47 and 52. If she thinks that she can put up a better pound for pound performance without doing the last few kilos of her weight cut, she could. So it adds an extra sort of element to that. The higher weight class doesn't have that luxury. The 52s still have to make weight at 52, but the 47s only have to make weight at 52 as well, not 47, right? So potentially we could see Tiff and some of the other athletes from the lighter end of the weight classes, come in a few kilos above and put up a better performance. So that kind of throws an interesting spanner in the works. But then I guess the advantage goes to the heavier weight class, being that they usually would pull last because they're lifting more absolute weight, which means they sort of dictate where they land on their final deadlifts, right? And I think especially with Tiff being a subtotal lifter, she's going to finish her day before Megan and Evie do, and that's why I think she finishes in third place. However, my prediction for 1 and 2, I think Megan Lee Smith gets it done against Evie. So this is obviously the rematch that we're going to see, which was a riveting matchup at Worlds this year. Megan Lee Smith, everyone knew she was going to be strong and pushing Evie more than what she previously has. Evie has been winning the last couple of Worlds without needing to take a final pull. Not only did she need to take it, she literally had to pull it or else she would have lost. She had to pull for the win on her final attempt against Megan, and she did it and she got the win, but she was pushed to literally within a kilo of her best ever number by Megan, and Megan looks like she's just getting stronger in training. Evie has expressed that she feels like she's kind of plateauing. She's potentially considering moving back up to 57s. So who knows how this goes. I just think that based on the world's performance, based on the trainings, I'm backing Megan here. I think Evie probably will again have the final say with her last deadlift, or she'll at least have the chance to load to take the win again. However, I think this time Megan is just going to push her just that little bit too far, to the point where Evie's not going to be able to pull for the win this time. And Megan Lee Smith finally breaks that 52 kilo winning streak of Evie that she's pretty much had since she dropped to the weight class back in Sheffield 2023. So very curious to see the rematch play out here. All right, on to the men's lightweight weight category, and this is the 59s and the 66s grouped together. So we have Antoine Garcia, Ivan Campagno Diaz, the reigning world champion in the 59s. We have Clifton Foe, Santos Jimenez, Joe Jordan, who everyone is talking about with his training, of course, Pana Teranides, Jonathan Garcia, Kasim Sansenyumong, and Kyoto Ushiyama. And those are their best totals as well as corresponding GL points. Again, this will differ from what the nominations order is exactly, but those are the best performances that they've put up. Now, interestingly, this is probably the category across the men anyway, where the majority of the world-class or best athletes in the world are still here, right? Most of the athletes that have pulled out have been from the upper end of the weight classes, right? However, this is probably the one we're going to see the most amount of world-class lifters still there, which is pretty cool. Now, the 66s are definitely the favorites here, rather than the 59s. You can see that pretty clearly from the GL points. And it seems like it's going to be a 4 or potentially 5 horse race here. Now, I say 4 or 5 because Kasim Sani is a bit of a question mark. Obviously, he had that experiment where he dropped down to 59 at Worlds, which didn't really go his way. Obviously, he was injured, which was it the weight cut, was it not? We'll never know exactly what effect that had, but he was definitely far from his best. That much was clear at Worlds. How much or the extent to which he's recovered is also unclear. I think is going to be definitely in better shape than he was at Worlds, but will it be a good enough shape to threaten for the win and the podium? I mean, I'm pretty sure he's still wanting to come in at 59, or maybe he'll come in as a light 66, so he doesn't kill himself to make the weight when he doesn't need to. Who knows? But I don't think he's going to be at his best still. He's definitely not going to be at his, total-wise, he's not going to be at his best, but whether or not he's at his best GL points-wise, again, I would probably say he won't be. The other interesting point here, before I talk about some of the top 66s, Ivan Campagno Diaz, I'm pretty sure has said he's not going to be cutting to 59 for this, which I think is a great idea. Again, like I said, this is the advantage that the lighter weight classes have in each weight category, is they're only confined by the weight class limit of the upper end, aka the 66s in this case. So Ivan Campagno Diaz could come in as a full-on 66 if he wanted to, or he could just do a less drastic cut into low 60s territory, right? Because you would imagine the last couple kilos of that weight cut are the worst. And I know Ivan has hit some pretty big gym totals in the 640s, right? Which admittedly would still leave him a ways off of being a contender for podium, I would think. But it would still be cool to see what he can do without making those final killers of the cut to 59. But yeah, apart from that, the main contenders here are Kyoto, Jonathan Garcia, Panna, and Joe Jordan. And I'll talk about how exactly I think they're going to land. But I think what Kasim San and Ivan do as potentially 59s or very light 66s will also be quite interesting. But my fifth prediction, I think Kasim San, like I said, he's going to show up healthier than he did at Worlds. However, he still is not going to out-total Ivan Campagna Diaz. Ivan, I think, is still going to sort of keep his throne as the best 59 lifter now. I know Wasker's obviously out injured, but Ivan, I think, is going to put up a bigger total than what he did at Worlds, albeit likely not in the 59 kilo weight class. But yeah, I think Kasim Sen is going to do better, put up a much more respectable total. However, yeah, I don't think he beats Ivan. And I don't think either one of these two are really going to be threatening for podium. Number 6, Kyoto and Panna are both going to pull for the win, but they're both going to miss, and Panna is the one who's going to end up on the podium out of them two. Now, a few things here. Obviously, Kyoto and Panna have both announced that this is going to be their final performance at 66. Both of them are in a very similar boat in the sense that they have big gym totals, they have big weight cuts, and their platform performances don't often, or most of the time, pretty much all the time, don't live up to their big gym numbers. And they're both relatively tall for the weight class, and they're both super lean and shredded as well, right? So people have been sort of calling for them to move up for a while now, and I think sort of Shell was a catalyst to that, being that such a dominant force entered the 66s. They thought, all right, may as well move up and realize my full strength potential. I don't know if that's still the plan now that Shell has announced he's forever done with the 66s, right, and he's moved back up to 74. I don't know if that'll change things. They might look at that and be like, well, you know what? I'm going to stay 66 now that I'm back in contention as one of the best. Who knows? But as of now, the latest info we have is this will be their last dance, if you will, as a 66. So I think they're both going to want to, in a way, leave it all on the platform, and that's why I think they're going to load up for the win. Either way, I think they'll be close, so it will make sense for them to do so. However, I just don't think they get it. I think the other two 66s I have above them, I think are just going to be stronger on the day, and I have more faith that they're going to make more of their lifts and more of their attempts than Kyoto and Panna will. And I also think that out of the two of them, Panna, I mean, I put Panna for the podium just because I'm like, well, who's more likely to have a bigger total on their openers and on their second attempts? Probably Panna and Team France, who take notoriously interesting jumps where they're almost maxing out in their second attempt, only to take like a 5 kilo jump for their third. But yeah, I think it'll be out of reach for them to win. I think Panna ends up on podium. Kyoto unfortunately doesn't. Also, Kyoto has a pretty chronicled history of missing deadlifts for the win. He's attempted winning deadlifts at several worlds, even at Sheffield, and it just hasn't gone his way. So I just don't see it going his way here either. I would love to see either one of them pull it off. Imagine how good that would be. A World Games win, the inaugural Raw World Games, on your last time out of 66. What a way to go that would be. So I would love it for them, but my prediction is that they won't be able to do it. And as far as 1 and 2, I think Joe Jordan is going to beat Jonathan Garcia to get the win. Now, Jonathan Garcia probably would be the safe bet here. I think he does have the highest top-end strength out of the 66s, or the highest top-end strength that is most reliably transferred to the platform, probably, I would say, right? Although he also has issues with, squat depth and obviously deadlift grip, so it's not as reliable. But Joe Jordan has been killing it in training. There is so much hype around him, and I think he's going to live up to it. Now, I'm not going to buy into the whole, he's going to go 750, he's going to challenge Shell's 770 world record. No, he's not going to come anywhere near the world record of 770. He's not going to go anywhere near 750. That's a gym total he did closer to a 74 than a 66, right? However, I do think he's going to be good for, 720-ish on his top end, which probably would win it, right? If we're being real with like the travel they have to do to China, to, obviously the conditions that they're going to be competing on the day. Yeah, I don't think we're going to see massive totals here. higher than like 720s or so. But I think Joe Jordan is just looking crazy strong. And out of the two of them, between Jonathan and Joe, we know Joe Jordan has the bigger deadlift. Jonathan Garcia's deadlift is definitely not a weapon for him, right? It's notoriously the lift that sort of let him down. Not because he doesn't have the strength, but usually, more often than not, it's a grip issue for him, right? And Joe Jordan has a pretty big deadlift that's been looking even better in training. And it looks very well rounded across the 3 lifts in training. So that's my prediction for the men's lightweight weight category. All right, on to women's middleweight. So the lifters are going to be competing. This is the 57s and the 63s grouped together, by the way. And again, we're going to see some crazy worlds rematches, which is awesome. Sovan Factra Pal, Bobby Butters, Joy Namani, Jad Jacob, Sarah Naldi, Chiara Bernardi, and Alba Borstrom are our nominees here. Now, this one is very tight to call because we're pretty much going to see a rematch of the 57 kilo podium from Worlds this year. I know the nominations for games actually came from podium of 2024 Worlds, but it just so happens that this works out to be a cool rematch off of this year's Worlds podium, which is awesome. But you have Joy, Judd, and Sarah Naldi, who all went toe-to-toe at Worlds this year, with Sarah Naldi coming out on top. However, both Joy and Judd loaded up big to pull for the win. They both couldn't get it. Joy came a lot closer than what Judd did, but they both threatened Sarah there. And if they're both at their best, then either one of them could come out on top, right? Sarah Naldi looked strong, but she didn't look unbeatable out there. In fact, she looked pretty vulnerable to those bigger deadlifters, right? So who knows how that's going to play out. And then you have a rematch of the top 2 finishing 63s from this year in Chiara Bernardi and Alba Borstrom, who both beat Meg Scanlon, right? Reigning world champion and biggest ever 63 total. Alba is now obviously the IPF world record holder with a 565. Chiara finished 5 kilos behind on 560. And that again is going to be a crazy rematch that could go either which way. In terms of how they're going to finish amongst one another when it comes to GL points breakdown, those 5 are all fighting pretty much for the win and the podium amongst themselves. I know Sovan Factra and Bobby Butters are also there. I just think that I know Bobby Butters' GL points there is pretty close. However, I think she did that as a 53 point something lifter. Her best total being 490s, I want to say, as a 57. I think she's going to be a bit below the top 5. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be, we're going to see big deadlift attempts for the win here. We're going to see, I could honestly see almost any order of the podium out of these 5 lifters. This was probably the hardest weight category for me to pick across potentially even all of them across the men and the women. So I've not the highest confidence in this, but as always, I made a pick. I always do. Joy Namani, I think, is going to knock Sarah Naldi and Judd Jacob off a podium and get her revenge from Worlds this year. Get 57 kilo revenge and reclaim, if not the title and if not the world record, reclaim, I guess, she wouldn't even be World Games champion because she's finishing in 3rd, but I guess reclaim the battle of the 57s victor, right? Whatever you want to call that. But yeah, I think she ends up on podium in potentially 2nd or 3rd, and she's going to knock off Sarah and Judd. Judd, I don't know if she's back to her full best yet. Obviously, her total took a big dip at Sheffield due to unfortunate, understandable circumstances. She recovered for Worlds, but she still wasn't quite at her best. And the deadlift that she had to load for the win was just clearly way too much. If her squat and bench are back to the best, potentially the final deadlift is a lot more reasonable and she could be coming out on top here. But Joy Namani she looked strong on the day at Worlds in a squat and bench, and that final deadlift was pretty close too. So as strong as Sarah Naldi looked, I think this time Joy is she's gonna load to beat the 57s, and she's gonna get it this time, and she's gonna secure podium. And we're gonna see the reigning world champ Sarah Naldi, as well as obviously former world champ, world record holder in Judd. They're gonna end up finishing, in my opinion, off podium. But that leaves the top 2, which are of course the 63s. So it's between Chiara and Alba. And you know what? I'm picking Chiara here. I picked Chiara to win Worlds, and she came close, but Alba got the win. I'm going to back Chiara again, though, to win World Games. I think she gets her revenge against Alba Borstrom. She's going to take the win, get the 63 kilo win, get the World Games win, and she's going to get the 63 kilo world record, because I think that's what she's going to need in order to beat Alba. I think, again, this could go either way. Alba and Kiara both look so strong. Only 5 kilos separated them. The thing was, at Worlds, Kiara missed her, was it her second and her third squat, or was it just a third squat? Can't quite remember off the top of my head now, but she definitely missed a squat. And those kilos that she missed there would have been pretty crucial towards the total. And she wouldn't have had to load or go so heavy on a second attempt and have nothing left for her third like she did at Worlds. So I think if she does get a squat, which is looking crazy strong and training's looking good, she has the bigger deadlift, she's probably going to have the final say. And I think she's going to get it done against Alba. Now, as far as the order here, it potentially could also be Joy taking second, Alba taking third, and then Kiara pulling last to take first place. I don't know, depending on what the other 57 totals are, whether or not they're going to be near the world record, who knows. But yeah, there's my podium prediction for the middleweight weight category for the women. Again, I could see this going totally different direction, but hey, this is going to be my pick. On to the final weight category I'm looking at part 1 of my predictions. Like I said, I'll look at part 2 in a couple of days. But men's middleweight, this is the 74s and the 83s grouped together. And there are only 5 lifters here. So Pablo Anderson Perez is there, a Chilean lifter who, you know, probably might not have heard of as much, but his best GL point-based performance is at 740. However, he has totaled 780, although he did that as an 83 lifter. So again, he can come in as a 74 or an 83. It's up to him. So who knows where he's going to be. Then you have Clinton Lee, another 74 lifter. And then you have Enohoro, Asin, Jurans Kangamu, and Shell Backlund, who, when it comes to podium, are the 3 pretty clear podium threats here. It will take a pretty big upset or shake-up for the top 3 not to be NR, Jurans, and Shell. Right, so I think that's a pretty safe call to make. The order amongst them is not as safe a call, but I think the fact they're going to be top 3, you'd probably want to bet on that. And being that that's the case, I think NR is going to secure podium, and there's pretty much not anything left for him to do apart from pull for the win, right? The thing is, I know I predicted this going into Worlds, and I said this was one of life certainties, right? Death, taxes, NR pulling for the win, loading whatever he needs. Slightly different scenario at Worlds, because the number he would have had to have loaded to beat Joe, because Joe was so far ahead with 890, would have been like 420 something kilos or 430, which is just stupid. So I can understand why he didn't go for that. He just loaded a measly 400, right? Or 402.5, whatever it was. But this time is different. I think he's going to be very near the top. I think Jurans and Shell are going to be very close together. And I'll elaborate more on that when I make my next prediction. But NR is not going to be far behind. And NR, like I said, podium is going to be pretty much locked up. I don't think Pablo or Clinton are really going to threaten too much from the back, unless, you know, they surprise us all. So there's no number left for NR to load but the win, right? I don't know what strategy he goes about it. Maybe this time he does take a first and a second. Maybe he slightly extends his world record and takes a jump he needs on his third, or he just skips his second or Hail Marys his second. Who knows what deadlift strategy he's going to take, but, you know, it's going to make for fun viewing regardless, I'm sure. But I don't think he's going to get it. Again, I kind of ran some numbers on what I think Jurans and Shell potentially going to hit and where that would put them on GL points and what Anna would have to load and what it would have to total. I just think it would be a bit out of reach. And again, I'll show the number or elaborate more on the numbers. I think Jurans wins. Jurans, I think, is going to hit in the 860 to 870, and he's going to beat Shell on his final deadlift. Now, a few things to talk about here. Number one is, where's Shell going to come in as? Obviously, Shell had that 66 kilo, you know, at Sheffield and at Worlds. But then at Worlds, he seemed pretty adamant he was done with the 66s. However, is he going to come in as a full 74? Because, as we will remember, in his initial cut down to Sheffield, he posted up the crazy, 815 gym total at 70 kilos body weight, right? Which kind of lends you to believe maybe he's at his best strength at around 70 kilos. The question is, after being so clearly done with the 66s and sick of cutting and having his body weight be so low, is he going to want to still push towards 70 kilos, or is he just going to be like, screw it, I'm filling out the 74s? Probably more inclined to think the latter, given what happened at Euros. At Euros, he came in and he had to cut to make the 74s, and we saw his performance there still be lower than what the 66 world record was. Now, I do anticipate he'll be in better shape for World Games, because obviously at Euros, he sort of did what he had to do to win. He didn't have any significant competition that was going to really threaten him. He didn't have to be any stronger than what he was. At World Games, I do think he's going to have to be at his best strength, right? His best total as a 74 is 815. And if he comes in at around that, it could well be enough, but I think he won't be, because I think Duran's, like I said, 860 to 870 is where I put him. And that will be enough to win, in my opinion. If you look at Duran's last few performances since he had that massive jump where he beat Russ, he's steadily been improving his total, right? When he went to Sheffield, he improved his total. At Worlds, he's improved his total as well. And he's just been getting that much stronger. And at Worlds, he totaled 857.5. However, he missed his third squat and his third bench, both on technicalities, because he completed the rep on both of them. So that's an extra 15 kilos he lost on lifts that he was strong enough to get. He just missed on technicalities. If he cleans that up, that already puts him at 872.5. Not to mention if he had made further gains through training or pulls a slightly heavier deadlift, which he probably could. So I think he's probably going to be on the upper end of that range and probably more like 870, high 860s, 870, which would give him at 83 or roughly 83 kilos body weight. You're looking at a GL points of 120.5-ish, depending on how close to 870 he lands, or 120.7. If you do the math for what that would mean Shell needs to total, he would need 820, low 820s as a full 74, or a pretty even 800 as a roughly 70 kilo lifter if he decides to come in at 70 kilos. Now, do I think he can do that? Absolutely. However, again, I think, are we going to see the strongest ever Shell? Is he going to total more than 815 after he's sort of restricted himself down to 66s? And we saw at Euros, not only did we not see a jump in his total, we saw a lower total in the 66s. Again, that was obviously given the caveats that I mentioned about he didn't need more to win. But yeah, I just think Duran's gets it done here. Also, the other benefit being Duran's will have his final deadlift after Shell. Even though Shell is the greatest 66 and 74 deadlifter to have ever lived, being that he holds both world records. Well, actually not the 74s anymore, but he holds the 66 deadlift world record still, obviously. As good as his deadlift is, Duran's is still going to pull after him, being that he's just 1 to 2 weight classes above him, right? So Duran's is going to have the final say. He's going to finish his day after Shell, and he's going to load the deadlift he needs to win. I think he's going to pull for the win, because there would be no other number for him to take. He's not going to be threatening to fall off podium. Enna is going to also load for the win, right? So I think he's going to... the number Duran's has to load will be a lot more doable for him than what Enna has to load. And I'm backing Duran's to win here, which I think is going to destroy the dream of Shell, which is to have the clean sweep of the year, aka winning Sheffield, winning Euros, winning Worlds, winning World Games. That would be a hell of a year. He's done 3 out of those 4 things. I just think Duran's kind of puts a pin in that and gets the victory here in the middleweight category of World Games for the men. So those are my 11 predictions. I'm going to be coming back in a few days with my part 2, where I'm going to be looking at the light heavyweight and the heavyweight weight categories across the men and the women, and making some more predictions there. But yeah, main takeaway, World Games is still very much worth watching, and you should be excited for it. And yeah, I would rather focus on all these amazing matchups that we're going to see, rather than the fact that the majority of the best lifters in the world have passed on the opportunity to compete here, which is kind of unfortunate. But yeah, let me know what you think, and if you agree or disagree with most of the predictions that I've made.